focus on that we have crisis. You have a financial crisis. Before that there was a food crisis. We have a refugee crisis. You have the Ebola crisis. There are a lot of crises around the world, but the one thing they have in common: education is always one of the primary solutions to move on.
The basic mission of higher education is to educate parts of the population to the highest possible level. So you also have to be an expert within your field and should be recognized.
Perhaps the greatest challenge is going to be to convince enough young people to actually choose the teaching profession as a career. But I think we have experienced during our Unite campaign that there are so many people out there that support teachers, that really believe that teachers are so important and do a great job. We have to preserve those allies. We have to keep them marching with us, because that's the way teachers feel that they're valued. The work is important today, and tomorrow, and for many days to come.
The question of teaching is still deeply undervalued in promotional terms compared to research. But if you think about it, that isn't necessarily to say that real qualitative research is intrinsically valued. I am inclined to the view that it's another symptom of the malaise and the disease of metrification, that everything is measured and that which they can measure they value. And in relation to research, I would be inclined to think, and maybe this should be researched, but I'm inclined to think that you're talking about it's easier to measure the quantity of output in research. And there is, just as it's difficult to measure the quality of a teacher as qua teacher, because there are so many elements, it seems to me that it's much more difficult to measure the quality of research. I mean, you have examples in history of people who literally spent their entire career researching one precise scientific problem. That person would be regarded as a complete waste of space in Irish and international universities today, whereas a colleague who did 47, let's face it, rubbishy research on the most facile nature would be regarded as having a record, because from an administrative point of view, he has a measurement. So I do think we should emphasize, and just because it's an old-fashioned value does not mean it doesn't have worth. So I would say there are no simple answers, and I know I'm making it sound like a simple answer, but I do think that if we want to be able to value teaching, perhaps the secret lies in going back to peer review, collegiality, and trusting academics.
Because I think there are two agendas out there. I think there's one agenda which educators believe in around access and widening participation, academic freedom for students. And then there's another agenda which we're getting from some university managements, which is very, very consumerist, where a degree is a product that individuals buy. And, you know, as academics, we should be critiquing that sort of thing and teaching our students to think critically about it, not just buying into something which is actually an ideology which becomes a form of subjugation of labour. So I think there are some issues about what sort of teaching and learning we want to support, but how we have a teaching and learning agenda which is a progressive one, not one which is tied in to simply meet the needs of the labour market, however unreasonable they might be, or into a discourse which just sees students as consumers, and therefore the quality of your teaching is just down to a student survey.
The academics get support for the new challenges caused by changes in teaching and learning, by the curriculum development, by the Bologna reforms.
Nearly 100% of the institutions have now said that they do have a staff teaching evaluation by students. And I know perfectly well that those things are very rarely well done. It is very rare that the evaluation of teaching will take as a point of departure the fact that teaching and learning is a transaction between the teacher and the learner, and not just, you know, evaluating the teacher, that the learner should be evaluating himself or herself. And I know of very few institutions that do that. So it is a real problem. And the question I have to you is whether this, although I do understand very well the rationale, but my training is of a cultural anthropologist, so I will ask the cultural issue, a cultural question. Would this be acceptable everywhere? You know, and how will you define the peers? Because, I mean, some countries are very hierarchical. And so they will, you know, whether a full professor will accept to have a peer come into his or her classroom is a question, you know. You're the ones on the front, you know, at the forefront of this. You have lived through many bad experiences of evaluations. So it would be really a very good project, and I think it would advance us all. And I'm not just talking about Europe. I mean, it would be a big world, you know, worldwide step to come up with an instrument that makes sense. You know, I think, yeah, Darwin would not have gotten tenure anywhere nowadays, you know, working 20 years on one publication, poor soul.
5 years ago, we tried during negotiations with minister about statute to balance a little more the assessments and evaluations you could have along the career between teaching and research and some other tasks we can have. It's slightly changed, not really. It's a long-term project, maybe, because mainly people look at research. Teaching is quite difficult to evaluate, depending on if you want to compare people or if you just want the kind of absolute evaluation, let's say what he's going is correct or it's just crazy. The main difficulty is in classrooms you only have students. They can of course evaluate. They do that sometimes or usually, but as the only evaluation is probably quite difficult. And if you want this to become a real evaluation, you must compare the students you have in your class with those that answer. They should be the same. That people now is not only supposed to do research, but also obtaining extra credits from somewhere to give more money to the institution, which is not a specific quality of a researcher, from my point of view. The easy way is just counting papers or counting citations or whatever. And as you told, I used to say that I published more papers than Einstein, but I would change my curriculum. I'm a physicist, so, and that does mean that that's not of course, publishing is important. If you are cited, it means that you have a certain recognition, whatever. You can't have a formula. If you have a formula, you don't need peers to evaluate whatever. You just can give it to some computer, it will end with the assessment.